Yeah, teacher, you have to mute like everyone to get.
Okay. So we can start up our engagement of today. My name is Teacher Arthur Kugonza, and I'm going to be taking you through biology. And today specifically, our focus is going to be on the theory. We've had some sessions with practicals. Now, today I want now to focus on the theory. And the focus will now be how can we interpret items, or how can we interpret scenarios and respond them according to what is expected of us. I'm going to be here for just 1 hour. So I'll try to summarize everything that is very important within this 1 hour. Then whatever would have remained, we shall obviously prepare other engagements. So I will share, of course, you have received the questions or a paper that is going to guide our today's discussion. So I'm going to share on the screen that paper, and we discuss to see how can we interpret the scenarios and again be able to respond to them. Someone is saying that they can't hear me. I don't know whether it cuts across or other people can hear me. So if I'm very clear, you can type in the messages. So it means I'm clear. So it could be someone's network that is not good. Okay. So please, if you can't hear me, that means your network is not good. So you can look for a good place with the network. Okay, now, what do we talk about in theory? Now, in theory, of course, also items scenario-based. So you have to be able to interpret the scenario and also interpret the task and then respond to the task that has been given to you. And whichever response that you give, there must be evidence in the scenario. Avoid overwriting. Overwriting is you pick an idea. After picking the idea, then without even further reference to the scenario, you start answering the way you feel like you should answer. Always when you respond to these items or scenarios, strictly adhere to the task and the scenario as well. If there is no evidence in the scenario, then you don't write about anything. So I will start with what we have as item number 1 in the paper that was shared to you. Okay, so I hope my screen is coming through. Okay. So this is we shall start with this question here. So we have our item. This item is saying that in the village of Nyakaton, located in Kabale district, local farmers predominantly cultivate cabbage and bean plants. However, the village recently faced a prolonged dry spell, followed by strong winds, which brought a significant amount of dust that settled on the leaves and stems of the cabbage and the bean crops. The farmers are worried that if this problem persists, it could lead to severe losses in their harvest. So now, this is the scenario that is before us, which we must interpret. And after interpreting, then we respond to the tasks that have been given to us. Now, whenever you are interpreting a scenario, try to take yourself there. Take yourself there. If they are saying that in the village, they are cultivating cabbage and beans. Now, you take note. Now, you start creating mental pictures, or you start creating mental pictures, let me say. You are seeing a garden, or maybe you are in a given village, and all that you can see there are cabbage plants and bean plants. So that's what they're trying to illustrate here. That the area, or in the farmers in the area, they predominantly cultivate cabbage and bean plants. But there is a problem. There is a problem in this village. And what is the problem? They are saying that they have been having a prolonged dry spell. And as if this is not enough, they are very strong winds. And they are saying that these winds are bringing a large amount of dust that is settling on the leaves and stems of the cabbage and bean crops. So what we are seeing here, from however up to bean crops, this is the problem that the farmers are being faced with. Remember, in each and every scenario, there will always be a problem that you have to respond to. That problem will always be there. So to us, this is now the problem. The village is growing cabbage, the village is growing beans. And they are saying that in this village, they have been having a long dry spell, a prolonged dry spell. So you ask yourself, what are the effects of this dry spell? Obviously, you expect the soils to be very dry without water. Then they're also saying that there are strong winds. Then you just now assume in this village, there are there are strong winds. What would be their effect on the plants, or maybe on the crops of these farmers? But they're saying that these winds are bringing dust. And now this dust is settling on the leaves and stems. So it's like sometimes as you travel, there are roads that you find which are very, very dusty, very dusty. And when you look at the plants beside these roads, you find that all these plants are coated with dust. All the leaves are brown in color. You don't even see the green, but you see brown color. Now, as a student of biology, you must start processing what problem are these plants faced with, given that all leaves are covered in dust. Now, how is it a problem to the plants? Then again, they are saying that the farmers in this village are worried that if the problem persists, of course, they will have losses in their harvest. Now, after understanding the interpretation of this scenario here, and maybe also having imaginations about this scenario here, then now we can now proceed and go and look at the task, because it's the task that have to guide you on what you have to write about. And here is our task number 1. Our task number 1 they are saying, part A, identify the specific processes and plant parts affected by dust. Very interesting task here. They are saying, identify the specific processes and plant parts affected by the dust. Now, you ask yourself, what do they want here? They are interested in processes. And Sherina, if you can't hear me, then it means maybe there is a problem with your network. So you try to adjust your network. Okay, I can see a raised hand here. Yes, someone using account Habi. Habi, what is your question? You can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, Victoria.
Good afternoon, teacher.
Good afternoon to you.
I'm answering the plant parts. I'm
Go
seeing
on.
there are leaves and flowers.
You have identified the parts affected. You have identified the flowers and then the leaves.
Leaves.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Then now, those ones who are using accounts with which are not in the names, which are familiar to us, I will not give you chances to ask your question or even to respond. So kindly, you must rename yourself to a proper name for you to be given a chance to respond. Okay. Godfrey. Godfrey. Godfrey, what are your responses? Okay, Godfrey is not responding. Naira. Naira, you can unmute yourself. Okay, Trevor, you can unmute yourself, Trevor.
Yes, so when also the stems affected.
The stems. Then what are the processes that are affected here? What are the processes that are affected?
The processes, which I think maybe there can be fertilization, photosynthesis, and then, okay, those ones I can stop from there.
Okay, thank you. Opio Godwin. Opio Godwin, you can unmute.
For me, I think that the process that is affected by the plant is gaseous exchange, respiration, and then photosynthesis. And then plant part is leaves and the flowers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Godwin. So Godwin has given us 3 processes which are affected and also some parts that are affected. Okay, thank you. Then let us hear lastly from Francis Ogwang. Then I'll now go to inbox to the chat and I see what is there. Yes, Francis Ogwang, which process are affected here?
To me, Master, the processes I think are photosynthesis, transpiration, and respiration. Then the
photosynthesis, transpiration, and respiration.
Yeah. Then the parts affected, we have the leaves and the flowers.
Francis, are you there? Okay, we've lost Francis, but he told us that to him, leaves are also parts which are affected. So, okay, I think, thank you. We can now go with those ones. So let me go in the chat room and I see what they're saying. In the chat room, there is okay, pollination, gaseous exchange, transpiration, fertilization, okay, photosynthesis, translocation, gaseous exchange, pollination. Okay. Yes, that is very interesting. Someone is even saying that the roots are also affected. Flowers are also affected. Okay, okay. Leaves, stems, flowers. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. So now, what you have done or what we've been discussing now, you have identified the specific processes and plant parts that are affected. You have identified them. And that is what this task wanted. So you had to go and look at the problem in the scenario. Then you ask yourself, which problem, which this problem is affecting which parts and it's affecting which processes. So that is how you interpret and come up with the responses to this task number A. Okay. Then so Bridget is saying, but teacher, I thought we have to explain everything as that is what is required of us. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Sir?
Yes. Okay, just a moment. There is something I'm working on. So meanwhile, we can now go to task number, to the second task. I'm going to display it. Just a moment. There is someone I wanted to remove. Over in discipline cases, okay, I have removed him. Okay. Now, let us go to the second task. Okay, now, let me first ask someone who was saying that don't we have to explain? Now, for you to be able to explain, you just have to make sure that you interpret the task. The task will always be clear. If the task is saying explain, then you ought to explain. Now, our task A is just saying identify the processes and parts C affected. So what you have to do is just, you have to identify them out. It is not that every question you answer, you have to explain. For you, just interpret the task and respond to the demands of the task. If the task is saying identify, you identify. If the task is saying explain, you explain. If the task is saying describe, you describe. If it is saying maybe mention, you mention. If they are saying outline, you outline. So for you, what you have to do, just interpret the task and flow with the task. You don't have to modify your task, and you make it into your own format. Then now task B. So task B is saying that explain how the functioning of these plants is affected and the roles of the affected parts or processes. Explain how the functioning of these plants is affected and the roles of the affected parts or processes. So now, when you look at this task is clearly asking you to explain. So therefore, it means in this case, you must explain your points. But if the task was saying outline, you'd have outline. Okay, now over to you. Now that you know the processes which are affected, and you also know the parts which are affected. Now here we have the task. It is saying explain how the functioning is going to be affected and the roles of those parts or processes that are affected. So in other words, I want you to explain to me, of course you identified that one of the processes affected is photosynthesis. Now, can you explain to us how is photosynthesis affected and what is the role of that photosynthesis? Oh, you've mentioned that flowers are affected. Then you have to explain to us, how are flowers affected, and what is the role of flowers on a plant. So this is now the task. So I want to hear your responses. How can you explain the processes that are affected? So Ian is saying, sir, were all the answers given correct? I request you to vividly outline for us what's right and what is wrong. Yes, Ian, all answers that were given were actually correct. All answers given were correct. All of them. People were saying flowers, leaves, stems, photosynthesis, translocation, gaseous exchange. Indeed, it is true. Those are the processes and the parts that are affected. Okay, now I'm accepting responses for this task B. Task B. Of course, Charity is saying, how do flowers come in? And what is the importance of flowers? Now, that takes us back to the biology that we learned in school. And those ones who are giving me the points of flowers. Now, I want to see how you explain how the answers you gave or how the parts you gave are affected or how the process you gave are affected. So I will start with the, please remember, if you're not if your account is not in a name, I will not give you a chance to ask or even to respond. So you must rename yourself to a proper name. Okay, let me start with the Ruth. Yes, Ruth.
Teacher, can I first ask then explain? I'm going to explain transpiration.
Okay, it's fine. You can ask.
Okay, teacher, my question is, I'm actually asking together with the precurrent participant who has been also asking if all the processes are correct, because I don't know where translocation does what comes from. I don't know how it comes in this whole scenario. So that is my question. I need a clear explanation. Maybe the following participants will be able to explain it as a process. So I'm explaining transpiration. Transpiration, the release of excess water to the atmosphere through the leaves, especially. So since transpiration usually occurs through the leaves, stomatotranspiration in particular, it's going to be affected because we had a prolonged dry spell followed by strong winds. Wind is a factor of transpiration. If there is strong wind, the rate of transpiration will be high. And also, since it was a prolonged dry spell, it increased the transpiration pool, thus increasing the amount of water being released into the atmosphere through the leaves. How did it increase the transpiration pool? It's by opening the stomata widely, since stomata open due to presence of light. So since it was a prolonged dry spell, not only were the temperatures high, but also the light intensity was high. So we have these two factors influencing increase in the rate of transpiration. Temperature increase the kinetic energy of the water molecules, thus increasing collisions, hence evaporation. And then the light intensity increase the size of the stomata, thus increasing the rate of transpiration, the amount of water released. And then the strong winds also were able to blow off the water bubbles that were on top of the stomata, thus increasing the rate of transpiration. Yes, teacher, that is my point. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Yes, now Ruth, you've been able to give us very interesting points and well explained. Only that my worry is, because if you were to write all that you have mentioned, I'm sure you'd run out of space. So one of the skills how to present in these scenarios, you have to be clear and specific, but at the same time, elaborate. For instance, you have given us how transpiration is affected. And indeed, you have used the evidence from the scenario. I like that. You have used evidence from the scenario. You have told us that transpiration will be affected in that the strong winds will increase the rate at which transpiration occurs, because wind is a factor that affects rate of transpiration. Then you have also gone ahead to tell us that actually this wind blows away the water bubbles. Now, I will not call them water bubbles. I will call them vapor on the leaf surfaces. And once the vapor is blown off, then the rate of transpiration is expected to increase. Now, that was the point. That was the point. Only that, what I have not heard you mention, you've not explained the role of the process. You have told us how transpiration is affected, but you've not gone ahead to explain to us the role of the process. Because the task is saying, explain how functioning is affected and the role of the processes. So I also wanted to hear that transpiration plays this and that role. So that one you missed out. But however, the other, how you explain your point of transpiration, it is very proper and correct. Then let me have James. James, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, for me, I want to talk about photosynthesis.
Yes.
Now, photosynthesis, since it is the process by which plants are able to make their own food, due to the dry season, there will be a high rate of evaporation in the surrounding areas and the high rate of transpiration within the plant. This leads to reduction in the amount of water. When there is, since water is a raw material for photosynthesis, there will be less food to be made through the process, thus leading to reduction in the amount of food made during the process. That's my response.
Okay. Thank you so much, Francis. It was well explained. So you've explained to us the photosynthesis and how it connects to loss of water in the soil. Because we know there is a dry spell. So obviously we don't expect water in the soil. And we know water is a raw material for photosynthesis. So it means that in this dry spell will drain water from the soil. Therefore, the plant will not be able to absorb any water for photosynthesis. It shall have a reduction in rate of photosynthesis. Only again, what I have not heard Francis talk about is what is the importance of photosynthesis. And also, when you're presenting your answers, you follow my order in the task. You follow the order in the task. I have said, explain how functioning is affected and the role of the affected processes. Therefore, I expect also you to respect this task and you follow the order. Start with how functioning is affected, and after that, give me the role of that process. Now, whenever interpreting these tasks, you flow with them, follow them. Don't have your own format of answering. If the task is saying start with the roles, then you start with roles. If the task is saying start with the explaining the functioning of this, how functioning is affected, then start with that. Okay. So, we can now have another person. So far had the point of transpiration, linking it to the wind. Then we have now had a point of photosynthesis, but linking it to dry spell, lack of water in the soil. What are the other ways how functioning is affected? Yes, Emmanuel Sekaita. Emmanuel, you can unmute yourself. Emmanuel, are you there, Sekaita?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Now, photosynthesis will be affected in a way that trapping of sunlight trapping of sunlight energy by chlorophyll will be blocked. In this way, we are going to have reduction in splitting of water molecules that will reduce in carbohydrates to produce, that will reduce in carbon dioxide to produce carbohydrates. In this way, the plant is likely to have less food for it to survive. Thus, it will dry. Yeah.
Okay, that is great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Sekaita has now brought in the point of dust. The previous presenters had not talked anything about the dust. So he's saying that the dust are going to affect photosynthesis. And how does it actually do it? Now we know that the leaves have chlorophyll. This chlorophyll traps sunlight energy. But for them to be able to get this energy, this light has to pass through the outer layer of the leaf. And the dust has covered the entire leaf. So the dust coating simply blocks the stomata. So the dust coating simply blocks light penetration to reach the chlorophyll. So the chlorophyll will be there in the leaves, but light is being blocked by a dust layer. And once light is blocked, then we shall not have, so we shall have a reduction in the rate of photosynthesis. What is causing this reduction? The dust has blocked light penetration through the leaf surface. So that is how that point, or that's how dust comes into the picture. Okay. Okay, let me look for another person. Charity. Charity, you can unmute yourself. Charity.
So I have a question. I'm still wondering how flowers came in if they were not even talked about in the scenario as organs were affected. Then also, I agree with the speaker who talked about the increased temperatures, increasing transpiration, and also the wind, increasing transpiration. But then there's also dust covering the leaves, which now reduces transpiration. So do you talk about both of them, or there's one that's as if correct that you're supposed to talk about? And I'm also wondering how translocation is affected as a process. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Charity. Now, I'll start with the your question of you've had of how the different points have been explained in terms of how dust affects, then also the increased temperature, increasing rate of transpiration. And the question is, do you have to mention all of them, or do you have to explain all of them, or you can pick up one of them? Now, as long as you have space, for you, any idea that you have realized is correct, you explain that one. But when you're doing it, you can at least stick to one explanation per process. For instance, if you're explaining the process of transpiration, now you can just one explanation is enough. For example, when I look at the point of transpiration, transpiration can be affected, one, through heat. The increased temperatures can increase transpiration. Then secondly, wind can also increase transpiration. Then you've also brought in the idea of the dust blocking the stomata, which is also going to affect the rate of transpiration. Now, all those are 4 different ways how you're going to explain how functioning of how transpiration is affected. Now, for you, it's okay. You can only pick one point. For you can say that me on transpiration, I'm going to explain in terms of dust blocking the stomata. Another person can say that me on transpiration, I'm going to explain in terms of high windy velocity. Another person can say that no, for me on transpiration point, I'm going to explain it in terms of increased temperatures due to prolonged dry spell. So whichever approach you take, for me, when I'm scoring or when I'm marking, I'm going to accept one explanation per, so I'm going to count how many processes have you been able to explain. How many processes have you been able to explain? If you pick only one process and you explain it 3 times, me, I'll take that is only one process. If you pick 2 processes and you explain them separately, then I'll take it that those are 2 separate processes. So that's how, that is what can be done. Then people are still asking, how do flowers come into the picture? And also, how does translocation come into the picture? Maybe we can first follow that trend. Now, I want to hear from you, the participants. How does the situation in our scenario bring in translocation? How does it bring in translocation? Someone give us that point. So I'm assuming whoever has left the hand up wants to explain on how translocation is affected or how flowers are affected. Okay, so let me pick someone. I'm picking randomly, but I'm only picking those people with accounts in their names. Okay, yes, Dembe. Dembe, you can unmute and talk to us. Dembe. Dembe is not responding. Brian, Emma. Brian, Emma. Can unmute yourself.
Sir. Okay, I was like, translocation can be affected in the way that the stems which may be transport the water and the food are broken down in the process, whereby the wind comes in when it is very strong. So that's how maybe it affects the plants. When it destroys it, when it breaks down, I think the plants, then it will affect the crops themselves.
Okay. So you brought it in that line that when the stomata only that I'm not sure whether we have stomata on the stems. Do we have stomata on the stems? The stems, the openings we have on the stems are called the lenticels. They are not called the stomata. Okay, let me hear from another person their view. Chiza. Chiza, you can unmute and talk to us.
Teacher, I think it's because of the root cause. They won't be able to receive enough water, and that means the xylem won't be able to transport enough water and mineral salts to the leaves. That's why translocation is affected.
Okay, we shall. I will harmonize on that later. But thank you. Yes, Esther. Esther.
For me, I think that the stem that helps to transport water from the roots to the leaves is destroyed. That's why translocation cannot happen.
What destroys it?
The wind.
You're saying the wind has destroyed the stem? Okay. Francis Impungu. Francis Impungu, you can unmute.
Teacher, I think the strong winds might have damaged the stem, which contains the xylem and phloem responsible for translocation of food materials. Yeah.
Okay. Then let me hear from Mugume Elijah. You can unmute yourself. Yes, Elijah. Elijah, we can't hear you.
The wind is like it affects the stems, which later on affects the phloem, hence causing a delay in the transportation of food from the leaves to the other parts of the plant using the stem, which will later on affect the process of translocation. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I will harmonize on that one later. Now, I want someone to tell me about the flowers. How do the flowers come into the picture? I want someone to tell us how do the flowers come into the picture. So if you don't have, an answer, Trevor Albert, you can unmute and talk to us.
Okay, teacher. I think how the flowers come in is that the dust particles sit on the flowers, one, making them unattractive for insect pollinators. And then also the same dust settles on the receptor sites for pollen grains, so pollination is affected.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Albert, for that. Okay. Now, Albert has now been able to fully convince even me that indeed flowers are involved. Flowers, of course, someone was saying that flowers are not there in the scenario, but we are talking about plants in the garden. And specifically, we're talking about bean plants. Remember, for the beans, they come from flowers. So if you are to harvest anything like beans in the garden, then it means you don't have to tamper with the flowers in the garden. And they are saying that now, when this dust in the wind, when this dust settles on the flowers, these flowers will be unattractive to the bees. Remember, bees are attracted to flowers because they have a bright color. Now that bright color will be killed by the dust. Therefore, bees will not come to visit the flower to pollinate it. So that's how flowers come into the picture. Then secondly, also given us a point of receptor sites, that the stigma is always there to receive pollen grains. Now, if the stigma is covered in dust, it means even when pollen grains come and fall there later, they will not be recognized by this stigma, hence affecting the process of fertilization. Then, another point that you can talk about the flowers is that, of course, I don't think that if dust falls on these flowers will produce a nice scent. So the flowers will now be smelling unattractive to the pollinators. Hence also directly affecting the process of pollination and subsequently fertilization. So that is how flowers come into the picture. Then the answer of translocation. I had thought that someone would come and convince me that translocation is involved, because I wanted to first hear the explanation you're attaching to these points here. Translocation, ideally, it is not coming in. Translocation is not coming into the picture. And why is it not coming into the picture? It's because translocation is the transportation of manufactured food. Translocation occurs in the phloem, the stem. And here, the only way we see how our stems are affected is that just dust is surrounding the stem. Therefore, if dust is surrounding the stem, then it means that the transportation of food is not affected in any way. Maybe if we had seen something like that, maybe maybe there is something removing the bark of the tree, then would have said that now indeed it is true that if you remove the bark of the tree, you are removing phloem. Therefore, you're going to end up affecting the process of translocation. So in this scenario here, the process of translocation does not come into the picture. So I think now I have answered those people who were asking about flowers and also asking about translocation. Now I want to go to other processes. So we've talked about photosynthesis. And we've had the explanation of water. We have had explanation of dust blocking the leaf surface. Then we've heard about transpiration. Now I want someone to explain for us the point of gaseous exchange. I want someone to explain to us how is gaseous exchange affected. Someone to explain for us that point. So let me see these ones who are putting their hands up. Muau Timothy, explain to us how does gaseous exchange come into the picture. Muau, are you there? Muau Timothy? Okay, Timothy is not responding. St. Francis Namabale, you can unmute and talk to us. St. Francis.
Yes, Master.
Okay.
Hello?
Okay, David. Okay, Timothy, you can talk to us. Then St. Francis will come later. Yes, Timothy?
Master, for me, I think the gaseous exchange was affected because the leaves which contains stomata were cut off due to a windy force. And the stomata, it is where gaseous exchange happens. It's where carbon dioxide.
So you're saying it is because of the wind force?
Yes, wind force.
Does wind force really affect the stomata? It doesn't.
No, like the leaves were cut off.
Who cut off the leaves?
Wind force.
Wind force does not cut off the leaves.
No, like the wind was like the wind removed off the leaves.
But is it possible for beans and the cabbage plants that wind can come and blow off leaves of cabbage and leaves of beans? Is it possible? You see?
Okay.
Now for you are now referring to other plants. Yet in the scenario, we are specifically talking about cabbages and beans.
For me, I had just joined. I didn't even read the scenario.
Now you read the scenario.
But I had some of you.
Okay. Okay. Let me hear from Gogolo Sauki. Gogolo Sauki can talk to us. Okay, Gogolo Sauki is not responding. Narubo wa Shakira.
Teacher Arthur, I'm around.
Okay, yes, Sauki.
Yeah, now gaseous exchange is affected in these ways. The first one, wind, already the scenario is telling us the wind led to accumulation of dust on the leaves. So first of all, it increased the thickness of the leaf. It created a layer which increases which reduces the diffusion rate of gases of carbon dioxide gas. So the first thing was reducing the diffusion rate of that gas. The second thing, its accumulation blocks the stomach, which is the entrance of the gas of the carbon dioxide gas. On the side of my friend was talking about strong wind. The strong wind, when wind is there, tends to block the carbon dioxide. It tends to block the stomach. Stomach tends to close in an attempt to reduce on the rate of perspiration during winter season. So that one, since entrance is passing through that, so that wind also reduces the rate of carbon dioxide penetration as it is.
Okay, thank you, Sauki. Thank you, Sauki. Shakira? Shakira? Shakira, you can unmute yourself and talk to us.
Yes, Master. The dust blocks the stomata, hence affecting the process of gaseous exchange in a way that this reduces the opening and the closing of the stomata. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank
you.
Okay, now let me first respond to Sauki's submission. Now, Sauki has given us 3 ways how gaseous exchange is affected. The first one was that it increases the thickness because it builds it builds a layer on the leaf surface, which is actually very correct. The dust will keep on piling up on the surface of the leaf, hence reducing the diffusion rate. Hence increasing the diffusion distance over which gases can diffuse to enter into the leaf. That is very correct. Then he's also bringing another point that the stomata, the dust will go and block the stomata. Once the stomata are blocked, then it means gaseous exchange will not take place. That is as brief as that. You just say that the dust particles block the stomata, hence preventing gaseous exchange from taking place. That is very correct. Then is now also bringing in another angle of wind, how wind affects gaseous exchange. And it is from his explanation that I'm now becoming convinced that indeed also wind can affect gaseous exchange. You see, with the new curriculum, every point that a learner gives, I can't just say, no, you are wrong. I have to first hear, how do you explain it? If I'm not convinced in your explanation, then that's when I'll now make a verdict or a conclusion that your answer is wrong. But before that, I have first listen, how do you explain your point? That's why if they ask you to explain it in a task, please, you must explain. If you don't explain your point, you'll not earn that score, or you'll not earn that mark. For every point that you give, you must fully explain it. And the explanation should be in relation to answering the task. Don't just put any explanation anyhow. So what was his explanation on how wind affects gaseous exchange? He's saying that when there is a lot of wind, the leaves will lose a lot of water. Now, what leaves will do, they will close in an attempt to reduce the rate of water loss. So once they close the stomata so that they can reduce water loss, then eventually the plant will not take in gases, or the plant will not carry out gaseous exchange. So the plant will not carry out gaseous exchange. Hence, in that way, gaseous exchange would have been affected. So now I think now it is now very clear. That's the connection between wind and the gaseous exchange. Okay, now I think we should now proceed. So we've talked about photosynthesis, we've talked about gaseous exchange, we've talked about transpiration. Those are 3 processes so far that we have talked about. Then there is another one which I want someone to explain, and maybe I'll tell it to you. There is another one of water absorption. Water absorption is also another process that is affected. Now, who can tell us how is water absorption affected by whatever we are seeing in the scenario? Let me now pick randomly. Someone who has not been given a chance. Yes, Benjamin.
What's the question about? Hello?
And if you're not ready, we can have another person. Let me pick Gilbert James. Gilbert James, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, for me, I think water absorption is affected in the way that during a dry season, when there is, of course, there is too much sunlight. Now, if the light intensity has increased, it will enhance the opening of the stomata. So when the stomata are opened, the rate of transpiration will increase. So when the rate of transpiration has been increased, there will be need to replace the lost water. So the rate of absorption will increase. And another way, I think, is that since the condition is totally dry and maybe there is a prolonged dry spell, due to increased rate of evaporation of the soil, so the water in the soil will evaporate. This will reduce on the amount of water being absorbed by the plant. Therefore, in that way, the rate of water absorption shall have reduced, leading to a reduction in the absorption of water. So that's my response.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you're bringing the aspect of transpiration pool. But to be brief, because we are running out of time, we'll be ending the meeting in the next 10 minutes. Now, remember, they told you that in that village, there has been a prolonged drought. So if there is a prolonged drought, then it definitely means there is no water in the soil to be absorbed. So therefore, because of the prolonged drought, the soil would be dry. Hence, roots will not be able to absorb any water from the soil. So that's how water absorption is going to be affected due to lack of water in the soil. What they're telling us in the scenario that the village has faced a prolonged drought. Okay, now let me first go through the chat. There are very many messages there. Someone is saying, sir, you mean the effects can be both positive and negative? Yes, the effects can be both positive and negative. As long as you are able to explain them clearly, then you can see where the connection comes in. Then when he's saying, teacher, are we supposed to explain how each part is affected, or you choose one and explain? That is a very interesting question, Winnie. That are we supposed to explain how each part is affected, or you choose one and explain? You are supposed to explain how all the parts you have mentioned, or how all the processes that you have mentioned are affected. You're not supposed to explain one. You're supposed to explain all. And to be on a safer side, explain 3 or more points. You're supposed to explain 3 or more points, how they are affected. Then, okay. I would be better if you type that on the screen. Typing, no, you just listen and summarize what you have to write down. Okay, people we are sending their responses here. I think most of these have been okay. Someone is saying what brings about the opening and closing of the stomata. Now that one is beyond your syllabus. How the stomata open and closes, it is beyond your syllabus. Someone is saying how is translocation affected? Of course, I hope I have answered that question. We've said that translocation is not an affected process, is not a process which is affected in this scenario here. Then someone is saying, repeat how dust affect the processes. I think I have also mentioned that dust simply blocks the leaf from, blocks light from penetrating into the leaf, thereby reducing the rate of photosynthesis. Then we have also said that dust blocks stomata. And once stomata are blocked, then the gaseous exchange cannot take place, or carbon dioxide will not be absorbed. And we know that carbon dioxide is a raw material for photosynthesis. Okay, and many responses have come in. Okay. Someone is saying, how can wind dry out soil? Please, it is not the wind that dries out the soil. If you look at that scenario, if you look at this scenario, it is clear they're saying that the village recently faced a prolonged dry spell. So it was clear in the scenario that the village faced a prolonged dry spell. Okay. 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 Someone was saying, but that looks okay. Okay. That is interesting. Someone is saying, pardon, on absorption. Is it absorption or imbibition? Okay, I talked about absorption by the roots, that roots have to absorb water. So if the soil is dry, definitely the roots won't have any water to absorb from the soil. So that's what I meant. Okay. Okay. Then lastly, let us go to the last task. Then we conclude on that one. The last task is saying, propose solutions that the farmer, could implement, that the farmers could implement, overcome the challenge posed by the dust on their crops. That is the task there. Propose solutions that the farmers should adopt or should implement, overcome the challenges. Now, on this one still, where I say propose solutions, you have to make sure that the solution you give is well explained. Do not just outline or state your answers. Every answer you give must be explained, because it is in the explanation where I will know what you are trying to mean. So I need now solutions. What should the farmers do? You have now heard of the problems. Now, what should farmers do to overcome these problems? Okay. So I'll start with of course, I'll start with those ones who have not given a chance. Yes, Philemon. Philemon, talk to us. Philemon, unmute and talk to us. Philemon. Philemon is not there. Okay. St. Francis Namabale. St. Francis, you can unmute.
Yes, thank you, sir. The farmers will irrigate to control water absorption.
Does irrigation control water absorption?
And also plant trees.
What problem will trees solve?
Sorry, sir.
What problem will trees solve?
What's solving the trees?
Yeah,
Water absorption.
Trees will solve the problem of water absorption.
So like the farmers need
Okay, we shall come to you later. Now, whichever solution you're giving, the problem it is solving must be clear. The problem it's solving must be clear. Now, you had outlined a very correct point of irrigation, but again, the way you're explaining it, it is now killing it, because irrigation does not control water absorption. Maybe I had thought that you're going to say irrigation will minimize or will reduce on the dust, because if bare soil is irrigated, or if you pour water on the bare soil, then definitely dust will not rise. So I'd thought that you give it like that. Okay, let me have another person. Philemon, are you back now?
Yes, teacher, I'm back.
What is your solution?
Like they need to provide irrigation farming to prevent pests and diseases, yeah, by even using insecticides.
Now, which problem are we solving in the scenario?
That's blockaging stomata in the leaves.
But you are telling us that how have pests been blocking the stomata? Because you're telling us that they should spray to kill pests. Are pests a problem in this scenario? Now you see. Now when you're giving the solutions, these solutions, the problems they are solving must be very clear in the scenario. And also in your explanation, I must pick out the problem that you are addressing in the scenario. Now he's bringing the point of spraying using pesticide. Now the question is, in the scenario, let me go back to the scenario because some of you maybe have just logged in. When you look at that scenario, there is nowhere they're telling you that pests are a problem in this community. It is not a problem. So it means that it doesn't mean that for you, any solution that you think of, you give it. That solution must be solving a problem that has been highlighted in the video. What are the solutions? Actually, no one has given me a correct solution yet. No one has given me a correct solution yet. So I'm yet to get someone to give me a solution. Vincent Mujisha, unmute and talk to us. Meanwhile,
that
yes,
the
Mujisha.
farmer should the farmer should plant trees around his garden of beans and cabbages, so that these trees will help to trap some dust, preventing the dust from reaching the leaves of the beans and the cabbages. That is my idea.
So for you saying that, okay, you're saying that we should plant trees, that trees can block dust from reaching the cabbages and the beans. Yes, it is clear. The explanation is clear, and it can work. It can solve a problem. So that is one. So he's telling us that plant trees. In that when you plant these trees will be able now to block some of the dust from reaching the plants. But only that I'm worried, when you plant trees, when will these trees mature to help block dust from reaching the beans and the cassava? Because the farmers are stuck. The farmers are stuck. We need a solution that will help these farmers overcome the problem that they are facing. Planting trees is a long-term solution. Whether even there is no soil, there's no water in the soil, those trees may dry. So basing on those others, I may be forced now to also reject your solution, that it is not well explained. The explanation does not make meaning. Okay. Let me pick another person. Okay. Let me pick, yes, Kisha. Kisha, unmute and talk to us. Kisha. Okay, Kisha is dozing. Semakula, Solomon Semakula, you can unmute. Solomon?
For me, my idea is that they can carry out mulching. When they carry out this mulching, they will conserve the water left in the soil, which can be used up by this plant to increase on the process of absorption.
That's interesting. Thank you. Now that one is now clear. You can accept that. Let them mulch. So if they mulch, we know that moisture will be retained in the soil. Since there is a problem of drought, so whichever moisture will be coming from the soil, it is going to be trapped by these mulches. That is one of the solutions given so far. Then let me have Tracy. Tracy, unmute and talk to us.
So the farmers should ensure good drainage and avoid overhead watering to reduce moisture, which can
Tracy, we have lost you. But then again, you are saying that a farmer, they should do increase drainage. Now, these people have a drought. They have drought. The land is dry. Then again, should they then now again improve drainage? So that one may not work because the problem they have is the soil is very dry. There is dust. So again, I don't see where the drainage thing is coming in. Then now you're also giving us a point which is now somehow confusing me. You're saying they should avoid overhead watering. Which solution are you solving in the scenario? Did they say that they were doing overhead watering? That one is also not clear to me. If you say that they should stop overhead watering, have they been carrying out this overhead watering that has affected them so much? So still that one is not very clear. Therefore, I will reject those points because your explanations are not convincing to me. Okay, let me, I think the last person, who is this last person? Okay. Let me go with the Mercy. Mercy. Unmute and talk to us.
For me, I think since they are facing a period of drought, they should carry out irrigation farming to help the crops grow well.
That is very interesting. They should irrigate because they have been faced with the problem of long drought. Let them do irrigation. That is very correct because you have attached it to the problem that you are solving, and indeed, the problem was there in the scenario. Okay, then lastly, let me pick Sechitende Peter. Sechitende Peter, what is your solution?
For
Peter, we have lost you.
I think they should practice mulching so that the soil can retain some water.
But they had given that point. Okay. Nasha, do you have a solution? Nasha? Okay.
Yeah.
Nasha.
Yeah.
Okay, talk to us.
I was saying that they should cover the plants using dry plants. This will prevent the dust from falling on the plants.
Repeat your point. Repeat your point. There's something I missed.
they should cover the plants, the cabbages, using the dry plants. Like for example, you can have dried maize or whatever. Then you cover those cabbages.
They will rot.
You cover those. No, I'm saying while leaving the light coming through. It's not like covering it the whole thingy, but like making a greenhouse thingy kind of sort of thing like that.
Oh, like you mean like they should create like a shade for them?
Yeah, that will prevent the dust from falling on the leaves.
Okay, that is interesting. You can create a shade that will somehow trap some of the dusty particles from landing on the leaves of these plants. Okay, from the explanation, that one is now correct. Now, I think now you have seen the importance of explaining your points. Before you explain your points, they don't seem correct. But after explaining, then everything now comes out to correct. Therefore, please, whenever you're giving your points, be sure to explain them so that maybe the person going to examine you will be knowing or will understand what you are actually trying to talk about. Okay. Now, what are the other solutions that people have not talked about? There is a problem of dust. What if I wash off dust from these leaves? I can do it. Like for example, I can do now overhead irrigation or overhead watering. I know that this overhead watering, water will fall on these leaves and wash the dust off. That can be a solution. I can also, the point of mulching, I can say that mulching will cover the bare soil, hence preventing dust from rising when wind comes. It can also be a solution. Then I can even as well say, water the roads, water the dusty roads. If the roads are dusty, then you should water them. I can mention that. And many other. But what is important is whichever point you give, you must be able to explain it. So that is all for today. So today we've been able to exhaustively discuss one item. And when you look at this item is coming from a specific area, or the ones you're calling elements of construct. Now, item 1 covers topics, all topics about plants. That is what item 1 always covers. Item 1 always covers topics from plants. So it means that that when you're reading for item number 1, item number will always be about transport in plants, nutrition in plants, growth in plants, asexual production in plants, and sexual production in plants. So that is what item number 1 is always about. Okay, so next time, of course, we shall now be looking at other items from other elements of construct. But please, whenever, as you have seen from this scenario here, that when you're interpreting the scenario, when you're responding to the tasks, make sure that every answer you give has evidence in the task, sorry, in the scenario. You don't just give any answer for the sake of giving an answer. We must be seeing it stemming from an evidence given in the task. Okay. So let me first peruse through in the chat to see if there is something so urgent. Okay. Okay, someone is saying that when are we discussing genetics? Genetics is also an element of construct of its own. So of course, in our subsequent engagements, we shall also be discussing areas related to genetics. Okay, and genetics is always about usually item number 3. Okay, so I think we can end the lesson from here. So thank you for being very inquisitive and interesting students. So our lesson ends now here. Now in our next discussion, shall always be discussing one item from this very document here, one or two items, depending on the time. Okay, so have a nice day. And bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for teaching.
You're welcome.
Teacher,
Bye-bye.
When are we
teacher, when
meeting
is the
again?
next lesson?
When is the next meeting?
Well, now the next meeting, of course, there is a timetable that we are following. I tend to think that how you access this thing, the timetable has also been shared there. But every day there are lessons in different subjects. Yeah.
Question.